So, what are your thoughts on the media coverage that Voices for Freedom have received? And when covering groups like this, there's always a risk that you're inadvertently promoting them. I mean, even doing something like this, people may argue that. Do you think the media coverage has been responsible in the way the media is talked about?
I think we've faced that as well when deciding whether we approach the media, because obviously they claim that all publicity is good publicity. It's probably a bit more complicated than that. I think overall it's been a bit mixed. For example, like a bad practice was, I mean, they were saying on the video the other day that when there was some coverage of their leaflet drops, that there was a picture of the leaflet, and you could actually scan the QR code from the paper, and giving their giving full references, almost leading people to them.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's been some good stuff, analytical stuff, which has got into what they're about, and some good debunking. I mean, there was a bad, like there was a particularly bad incident when Melanie Reid gave them a very soft interview during the occupation. I mean, like I say, it's quite interesting that they mentioned it in an article about it, that they don't give access to the media. It's quite interesting. And so in a way, when the media do get access like that and in person, effectively what they were asked is, it was almost like, some people have said this, what do you think? And they were then just allowed to just push their message, and implicit in, there was a sort of lie implicit in the fact that they were being interviewed on the basis that there's 3 mums concerned about mandates. So in a way, I think they just need to be a bit more savvy. It's very hard though, because people do need to be informed about what's going on and potential dangers, but I think they just have to be a bit more savvy about how they do it. That's what I would say. Yeah. I mean, it's a bit like I guess it's the same as with alt-right and fascists, that there's a point past which it's newsworthy, and maybe it's broken into the public consciousness, and then you need to start explaining what's going on. So they might have reached that point. It's going to be even harder. I think that the election is going to be a real challenge, because in a sense, if they put up candidate, there's the legitimacy of being a candidate and having a claim to take part in a public conversation. But it's a bit like with Billy the Kahika, it's that problem. Like how do you show someone without letting them just have a platform?
Yeah, and like you were saying there, with it gets to a point where you need to be covering them. And just thinking about the Parliament protest and how much I was approached by media, and I'm always happy to speak with them, but I'm not an academic in this space. I'm not a full-time journalist. I do a bit of freelance stuff, and I do the YouTube channel, and yet they were coming to me because you couldn't keep ignoring the far right when they were camping out on the grounds of Parliament and doing these live streams calling for hangings of politicians, and so the approach of just ignoring them hadn't, as to not give them oxygen, that hadn't worked, because they've been growing in the shadows, and then suddenly they've got to come to YouTubers to get the information on them. And I guess it's kind of similar with these conspiracy groups. You can just ignore them, thinking we don't want to give them oxygen, we don't want to give them publicity. But if they do suddenly start polling in the next election with whatever new political vehicle or whatever, then it becomes a lot harder to ignore, and you kind of need that background stuff, like the work FACT is doing. That's when you need that.
Yeah. It's a challenge, and I mean, there's also the stuff that they're literally putting out information that puts people with life in danger. So how do you deal with their leaflet? I mean, like, there is a sense that there's this idea that you do not debunk, and it's almost like, or challenge directly. And I think it's like, yeah, if you've got a person one to one, like your family member or something, it's like, yeah, well, maybe you don't just have an argument with them and say they're wrong. But I think that there's something around the fact that if their arguments are just ignored, that doesn't mean that people won't believe in them. And in a sense, even if they always talk about going for the wobbly middle, right? So you might have a doubt and then they'll pray on it. And it's like, people in the wobbly middle probably need a bit of reinforcing.
Yeah.
You know, with decent, and it's not just a case of, oh well, good information, yeah, let's provide good information from trusted resources. Yeah, that's very good. But if someone's saying ivermectin works, here's Malone, here's this person who, you know, who looks creditable, right? Why wouldn't you believe it?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you believe it? And
especially when you're not getting an alternative.
Yeah, there's been a real. I personally think that there's been a real lack of pushback to you know, it's a challenge, because if you say this is wrong, then people will say what, and then they read the thing, and they might be convinced by it. But on some level, you can't just let the space be filled by their opinion. I mean, that's sort of why I go to the Telegram, because they don't get any challenge. So obviously they're scared of it. There's a reason why they didn't want to talk to the media. And so obviously there is something that is in media coverage that they find threatening.
Yeah.
If done well.
For sure. So there's a real growing awareness now, I think, about the dangers of misinformation and disinformation, and that's partly been since the Parliament protest, but even before then, we were talking about the infodemic and this rise in conspiracy theories, and you know, we really saw it in the election, which Voices for Freedom have grown out of. For people who are wanting to get more involved in countering conspiracy theories and countering misinformation, what's something they can do? How can they get active in that space?
I mean, if you're concerned of it as an issue, yeah, as opposed to concerned about, you know, there's different things going on, isn't there? Because there's like concerned about someone in your life who's wobbling and might be going down the rabbit hole, and then there's sort of tips on how to deal with that type of thing, which would be stuff like don't confront directly, try and retain contact, try and basically not talk about that thing, and just work out what's behind it. There's all sorts of advice on that, but in terms of like as a more of a social problem, I think like deplatforming is obviously something that is available. Reporting, it's, you know, we all know that there are incentives for the social media companies to not clamp down on this stuff and not police their own rules, but there are rules, and you know, you will occasionally get a win, so it's worth doing it. So that would be one. I mean, like there's been this whole thing with people contacting venues where they don't know that they're having, say, a QAnon meeting, and they don't want to have a QAnon meeting, and it's their right not to host one. And so, you know, being aware of that and writing to people and trying to almost deplatform people from, you know, community places. What else? I mean, this is probably the point where you'd say join FACT, but we've not a massive movement, so you know, that's not. I think one thing I would say is try and be aware that the far right and fascism is not going to like come goose stepping down the street looking like a Nazi. Like, it's not going to look like it looked like in the 20th century. And to just like be aware, for example, like Mussolini, I mean, he took different strands and apparently contradictory ideologies and molded it together, and then what came out of that was fascism, right? And so I think it's just to try and like learn about these movements, some of the conspiracy movements, some of the fascist movements, the alt-right, and just to like get wise to what's going on. And I'm particularly thinking of a specific side of the political spectrum, which I think needs to get knowledgeable about this stuff and about the whole role that the conspiracism is playing in funneling people into a space where they can then be radicalized further by the alt-right. And a lot of that is Telegram, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
They're all on Telegram, and when they're on Telegram, they're gonna, everything's on there, isn't it? There's like Holocaust denial, there's whatever, and it just pops into your feed. So, and apart from that, there's stuff like, if they ever get around to proposing, there's lobbying and stuff for better regulation. I mean, I guess it's really stuff around the social media companies having a sort of more of a social responsibility, and conceivably you could have lobbying and campaigning on that. The other one is around education. I mean, it's a bit like uncontroversial, but so I think it's Finland. Like they teach kids they teach kids media literacy and critical thinking skills, and I think that is like a long-term protection. And so if you're involved in education, then see what you can do in that area. That would be helpful. I mean, it's sort of there's risks involved in getting involved in this stuff, because they dox you and stuff like that. So
yeah, I mean, anyone wanting to get involved in this kind of activism, be aware of the risks. Yeah.
I mean, don't be a bit careful as well, because I think we do know that there's I mean, obviously, there's lots of communities that have been facing this sort of stuff for years. The thing about this is that it's almost like the misinformation is not really the point, right? It's just wrong stuff. It's what's that for, right? What's the politics behind it? And the politics behind it is what the Centre for Countering Digital Hate called a digital anti-enlightenment. And so the idea, what they're mobilizing is leading to real life attacks on Muslims, trans people, women, anyone who is not part of, what am I saying? You know what I'm getting at.
I know what you mean. Yeah. Anyone who's not part of the dominant group or the.
I don't care whether you believe in the moon landing, whether the moon landings happened or the Earth is flat. But if you think it's been talked about because the Jews are using it to control the world, then that's the problem bit. It's not really the moon landing bit. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
So I think it's like the broader people, the people who are concerned about those movements, those issues, need to engage with this stuff. That's what I think, and get their heads around it and see it for what it is. So if you're thinking about what the relationship between Voices of Freedom and the right is, it's quite noticeable that they're not just promoting Epoch Times, someone who's loosely associated with the AfD in Germany, right wing Republicans. They also have on people who I would say are from the sort of Russell Brand left, quote, who are sort of veering towards conspiracism. And they also have people who are who are quite ecological. And so in a sense there's this sort of streak of anarchistic organisation that they've got, that they appeal to. So this whole localism, communities, and I think that and the natural health stuff is what's attracting the sort of hippies, festival crowd, crunchies. And I think that's partly from their social background and where they come from, but I also think it might be a deliberate strategy.
Yeah.
It's almost like we'll take mainly from the right, but we'll also take you from the left as long as you believe in the conspiracy stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's quite odd, and that's why you get people don't see Nazis when they're at their events. I think that whole issue of the fact that there's this we asked them to condemn the overt hate groups like counter, and the fact that they won't is tells you something. They refuse to condemn it, and you can say, well, that was because they didn't want to like break up the unity of the thing, the protest. But it also is, it's almost as if they hate the left and the wokes, but they're like a bit more tolerant when it comes to people who are like quite bad people and threatening to kill people.
Yeah.
And it seems that there's a lack of balance. It's almost like there's no guardrail to the right, or very little.
Yeah.
Whereas they've got these very, they've got a very different view too. There's a sense of with some of what they say. It's like, I didn't leave the left left me. The left has gone crazy. I'm the same. I'm just living my values, and I think they might have gone rightwards by mistake.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, there's this whole. I think you find on the political left, because I've been an activist for decades now, and it wasn't doing anti-fascism disinformation stuff that got my start, and so I've seen on the political left you get these people who their politics has developed to a point of being, anti-authority and being critical of like the mainstream media, and a lot of people read books like Manufacturing Consent, things, or pretended to read it and kind of cribbed some of the ideas, and I think a lot of those people are, if their politics never develop beyond, question authority, don't distrust the media, then they can easily get sucked into, being at a protest alongside the far right. And I think that, for some of the people who were there who maybe got in more through the Voices for Freedom side, they had this internal logic of, these people are protesting the same cause and I'm left wing, therefore this can't possibly be a far right event. When really they were all there marching in step, so to speak.
I mean, it's to some extent. I don't know if you want to keep this in, but I mean, to some extent, I saw some of that when there was some people who I probably wouldn't want to associate with involved in the anti-war marches in the 2000s, right? And if someone comes up and says to you, "Yeah, you're all shit because of them," you're going to go, "Well, no, not really." But I mean, I think that it's like, anti-corporate is not necessarily left-wing, and this is what I was getting about. This is what I was referring to with the try and understand what fascism was, right? Because fascism presented itself as a revolutionary movement, which is anti-corporate, and it was all about the community, and it had little women's cycling groups and stuff, and youth groups and stuff, and I'm sure that.
And in Germany, they even put the word socialist in the name of their fascist party.
Exactly. So I think that there's. I mean, I even heard one of their presenters going on. I mean, she's a permaculture person. She talks about it, and you're looking at it, and it sounds. It's like critiquing finance, capital, and like the over financialization, and you're like, yeah, and then you start hearing it and you're starting to think, hello, like they're not anti-Semitic, but it's like you sound like one of those money, those gold bugs, the weirdos that are into this whole fiat money stuff. And then so it's almost
I always
Yeah.
start to feel a bit uneasy when someone's going on about the banks and international banking and stuff. And it's like, yeah, there's real criticism to be made, but these, are these just dog whistles that, the person saying them doesn't necessarily even know that they're dog whistles, but they've
No, I
picked it up.
don't. I
Yeah.
don't think. I really don't think that they. I really don't think. I think this person is probably a decent person
Mm.
and is actually doesn't mean all that stuff. But I think that it's almost that you can be led to a certain point, and then some other people come in the room and say, "Hang on a minute, you like that? Have a load of this."
Yeah.
And obviously,
Yeah.
not everyone's going to go, but enough people will. I mean, I think it's quite interesting that they can repurpose. I mean, that's what fascists do, isn't it?
Mm.
They're like take things and repurpose them. And I think like the idea that Noam Chomsky, I've seen Noam Chomsky, right? It's just it's like there was one guy who was banging on about empire, and we're on the side of the empire, and I'm like, right, okay, this is some sort of crude Glenn Greenwald left type stuff, maybe going into red brown, all
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
lot. And he's just and then he refers me to this article, and it's almost like taking Chomsky's manufacturing consent and almost saying, yeah, you're pilled, that's what you are. And Chomsky proves it. So you need to take the red pill, and then you'll get all those all the propaganda. And it's just like that's not what Chomsky meant.
Yeah.
But it's the same with the shock doctrine. It's like, yeah, they do take advantage of stuff. They do take advantage of stuff. That doesn't mean that that the pandemic has been engineered to crash the economy to blah blah blah.
Yeah.
I think that the problem is that some of the sort of theories of how people get into conspiracies don't pay enough attention to the fact that you can be dragged into it because it's the explanatory power of it, which a political theory might give you, or understanding something like political economy, or how international relations actually work, right? And education and knowing. And so what they'll do is the question is like, well, if I believe that ivermectin works, right, why are they not giving it to people? Oh, well, it's big pharma. Why is that? And it's like the why, because it makes no sense. Why would they, right? If there was a cure for COVID, then they give it, but they believe that there is one, and they have to create a reason, and so then they're reaching, and they don't have a decent understanding of the world, and so they'll be given this conspiracy theory, and it's like, well, it makes sense. There's no other, you know what I mean? What else is giving you an explanation? So I think, and I do also think that like Voices for Freedom have quite correctly seen that there's a gap in society in the sense of like community. So particularly now, we haven't been able to get out. Some of the people that speak about, like the way they speak about what it was like at the protest, and it's like, I've been on protests and it is really good fun, but it's almost that they're getting meaning. They're getting a huge amount of meaning. They're getting real human relationships. It's not the real world, is it? Because you're all basically camping and having a party. So there's a lot of social. There's a lot of social connection that people are getting, and they're getting. It's not just, do you believe this? Do you believe that? I think that the social connection is what is making Voices for Freedom. They work really hard at welcoming people, giving them something to do, telling them that they're saving the world, they're saving the children. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, my life's pretty boring, so that's probably, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Great.
Yeah. Bit of a rant.
No, it's all good. It's great.